Hello everyone and welcome to Coming of Age on Scary Stories. Today, I, Ines, will be joined by Grace and Arisa, and we're going to be talking about our favorite scary stories from childhood through adolescence and onto adulthood. Thank you for listening and try not to get scared.
Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about a traditional Japanese folktale about a yokai or a Japanese spirit called a kuchisake onna. The story revolves around a woman that has a deformed face and a little girl walking home from school. The girl's name is Sachiko. She's 7, and as she walks home from school one day, she notices something odd. It's darker than usual. It actually feels pitch black. She quickly scurries home to avoid any yokais that may be in the area. As in Japanese culture in elementary schools, those are commonly talked about to motivate kids to go home earlier or to avoid the darkness. One day, as Sachiko is walking home, she notices something different. The streets are pitch black and there's no one around. She often finds herself in scary situations, however, it was nothing ever like this. As she keeps on walking, she slowly hears footsteps approaching her. She turns around to see a woman with a mask on. The woman smiles. She can't see her face, but she can just see her cheeks go up. She can tell that woman is something evil. The woman reveals her face by taking off her mask. She grimaces, a smile that's bigger than what should be normal, her lips piercing through to the sides of her face. She smiles at Sachiko and says, "Do you like my face? Do you think I'm pretty?" Sachiko, unaware what to do, froze. She stared back at the woman and said, "What do you mean?" And the woman repeated herself. "Do you like my face?" she said. Sachiko didn't know how to reply, but scared about anything bad happening to her, she decided not to offend the woman. She said yes. Moments later, the woman was on Sachiko and cutting Sachiko's lips similar to hers, repeating the words, "If you think I'm so pretty, why don't I make you pretty like me?" she said. Sachiko knew in that moment that she shouldn't have stayed out as late as she did. She should have followed what her parents told her and gone home earlier.
So, when we were in middle school, we were really fascinated by Creepypasta, which was a website that published stories written by people that were typically scary stories, sometimes even deranged stories. And it got a lot of flack for publishing the story Slender Man, which eventually led to the really famous crime of these two girls stabbing their friend in an attempt to meet Slender Man. So today I'm going to be reading the classic story Slender Man, and maybe we'll get to the bottom of why it is so appealing for people that they would commit murder for it. So here is the story Slender Man by an anonymous author on Creepypasta. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed by her front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. "It's only winter," she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards. She knew somehow that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she crab-walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils as black as the void she saw snake around the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the doors. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. "Nicole?" A warm male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she could say anything, or even if she could find her voice if she did have something to say. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital saying that her sister Lindsay was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both of her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out and to try to keep infection out of the wounds. Lindsay did not understand. The doctors had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to deafen herself against something. There was a mix of first and second degree burns on her hands, legs, and feet. From what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbors found slipped all over her entry to the apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room the first time, she thought that she spied the silhouette of a man in the window. That, she knew, was impossible. Her sister's room was on the 3rd story of the hospital.
I always appreciated the scary stories, the creepy novels, the weird little books that were in classrooms and stuff. I loved the kid versions, I loved the teen versions, the fables, the short stories, anything. But as I've gotten older, I've noticed that the style of horror that I like has kind of morphed a little bit, and I think the person that encapsulates that pretty accurately would be Stephen King. And Stephen King is probably the most decorated horror novelist of all time, and he's definitely my favorite writer. And there's this quote from him talking about the 3 types of scariness, and I think it just really shows how my perception has changed about scary stories. So this quote is, "The 3 types of terror: the gross out, the sight of severed head tumbling down a flight of stairs. It's when lights go out and something green and slimy splatters up against your arm. The horror, the unnatural, spiders the size of bears, the dead waking up and walking around. It's when the lights go out and something with claws grabs you by the arm. And the last and the worst one, terror. It's when you come home and everything you had has been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you, you hear it, you feel its breath against your ear, but when you turn around, there's nothing there." So this terror that he describes, I just think that is so fascinating, and it's so complicated. And so when I wrote my scary story for the class, I decided that I really wanted to try to create that terror thing in my scary story, rather than just making it obviously really kind of spook scary. So I tried to do the terror thing. So I'll read an excerpt of my story. And my story is about this guy who lives in his house that he lived in with his mother before she died. And after she died, he continued to live in the house, but he had to live there secretly, and he lived in the walls, and the family that lived there obviously didn't know he was there, and there's just drama that ensues. But Anyway, this is a little excerpt from that. Hours passed slowly until the house finally became still and silent. Opening his little door, Erwin re-entered the world and stood on his own 2 feet on the concrete of the unfinished basement floor. Taking a moment to stretch his forever hunched shoulders and bent knees, the man breathed a sigh of relief. He had played in this basement a lot as a boy, and when he closed his eyes, it was like he was still that little kid, standing in the same place. When he opened his eyes, once again, a discarded television sitting nearby caught his reflection in the screen. There was no young boy looking at him. Instead, all he saw was an adult with beady eyes and a brown mop of wild hair. This was reality. So basically, with that little snippet, I was trying to show a kind of horror that wasn't exactly obvious, and it was more ingrained that this is just like, no, this is so creepy. Like, I don't want to see this in real life. And that's the kind of horror that Stephen King likes to show. And so with my story, I just really wanted to try to do that. And I think that I did it, kind of. I think that somebody living in the walls is creepy. But yeah, I think that the kids' stories, they were obvious. There were just obvious types of creepiness. And with Arisa's story, there's another just obvious sense of grossness that you don't want to be around. And then with my type of terror, my type of horror, it's like a natural thing. Like, it's something that you don't want to be around, and I really like that kind of creepy.